and this is what, so you train normal people. I train mostly normal people, but I also train competitors and stuff, but I think it's a different client base, and I don't really do much of it. It's mainly just clients I've had for years. So when dealing with the general population, right? Like just normal guy, goes to work every day, might or might not have a family. Let's say you're Google executive or even just a regular employee or a guy who works at a grocery store. What is keeping Americans so overweight? And this could be as broad or as simple or as complex as an answer as you want. But if you're to pinpoint, why is America so damn fat? How would you answer that?
I think the path to slavery is downhill. And that's something that people don't get taught when they're younger, is that if you just follow the plan that's been presented to you, you will end up as a slave. If all you do is think that, well, if I go to college and I get good grades, then I'm going to have a good job, and I just do what I'm told, I'm going to get paid well. It's like, you're not going to be homeless doing that, but your life's going to be really hard. And so everything in your life that's been created by somebody else has been created the way it's been created to benefit them more than you. And so a lot of times people end up in their 30s and 40s and they're not making as much money as they thought they would, and they're in more debt than they thought they'd be in, and they spent too much on a car that they don't really need, and maybe they bought a house that's too big for what they can afford, and maybe they started a family before they were financially ready with a woman who wasn't the right person to start it with. And then all of a sudden you're working a job that you don't really like, and it places demands on you that you can't really contend with. And then your family situation is a little bit overwhelming, and you look at your finances and they're not as good as they could be. And so what do people turn to? They turn to drugs. And the most common drug in the United States is food, because food makes people feel comfortable. Food is designed to make people feel comfortable. In fact, the tobacco scientists, back when tobacco was becoming majorly stigmatized by Congress and the general science community, the tobacco companies started buying up food companies, RJR Nabisco, right? And they started repurposing the scientists who were paid to create addictive nicotine products like cigarettes. They repurposed them to create addictive food products. And so once you realize that these comfort foods are designed to do the same thing cigarettes do, and your life has been designed to be hard for someone else's benefit, then you realize that we don't have a food problem. We have a nation of addicts who don't have the proper coping mechanisms to deal with the fact that the path to slavery is downhill, and they never charted their own path. And every year it becomes harder and harder to pivot and reverse course. And so they just go for easy, fast, exogenous dopamine, not realizing that they can self-source their own dopamine and they can build themselves out of the rut that they're in, because that entire concept of self-sourcing your own dopamine, creating your own plan, not depending on a third party to tell you that you're doing good enough and you're on the right path, is so foreign to them that 9 out of 10 of them have nothing to aspire to other than being someone else's highly regarded slave or servant.
I've never heard it put that way. That is, one thing we talk about very, very frequently, even when we speak in private, right, is dopamine. And I've become fascinated. Now, I've always known about dopamine, right? Like the supplement industry has been selling L-Dopa for dozens of years, like dozens and dozens of years. So I looked into dopamine. Obviously, my first product was a nootropic. So obviously you have to delve into dopamine. And I know a lot about dopamine, but applying it to myself is something that I didn't realize why I trained. And I think that genetically inherent to myself, my mom's a drug addict, right? She passed away in November. My mom was a drug addict, right? I do think there is some kind of a genetic component to how that exists. I don't know what it is, but whether it's inherent, whether it's taught, whether it's in the DNA, you notice that alcoholics tend to breed alcoholics and so on and so forth. So for me, my drug was always the gym. My drug was always lifting. My drug was always exercising. My drug was boxing. I fed my addiction or my need for dopamine with other things. And now now that I realize like all these things that can help dopamine, like, dude, when you come over, I got a cold plunge in the backyard now. Every morning I wake up and that dopamine rush in the morning, it's like snorting cocaine for me. And people are like, oh, it hurts muscle gain. I don't care. I don't care. I'm not going to have that argument. So it does affect a little bit of hypertrophy. For me, the mental benefits I get from it, what I'm going at is as we look at all the stuff we're talking about, food, anything, you look at that show on TLC, My Strange Addiction, where they're eating, bleach and hair. And that is a way for them to obtain that dopamine. And it's quite fascinating when you realize that a lot of this is chemically induced. And if we can simply take one method to get increase certain levels in the body of things like dopamine and other things, then we can replace the unhealthy habits.
A lot of the most successful people are well-directed addicts. And so the difference between somebody who, dies of a drug overdose and somebody who creates $1 billion business is often, how are they relating to their addiction? Are they allowing their addiction to take them in a healthy direction, or are they allowing their addiction to take them in an unhealthy direction? I definitely believe that certain people in certain cultures or ethnicities have higher dopamine sensitivities than other cultures. And so one thing that I noticed for myself in the gym is in my training peak, my early 30s, I was willing, I guess I still am, but I don't think as much about it. I was willing to run through walls to set a 2-pound PR because the possibility of being able to beat my previous score was just so awesome to me that I was willing to undergo extreme discomfort to simply get one extra rep more than I'd ever gone, or get the same amount of reps with 5 pounds more on the bar. Most people don't care that much. Oh, okay, I got one more rep than last week. Great. I did the same lift with 5 pounds more. Great. For me, it was the most awesome thing ever. And so you realize, if you are totally amped up to get very, very incremental improvements, then you're going to put the work in that's necessary week after week to have extremely compounded success. And I think about, Asian cultures. My mom's Chinese. Asian cultures are very focused on school. Asian cultures are also very focused on gambling. And so I think something between the two is if you become a gambling addict, it's because a very small win, a very small unexpected win, teaches you to continue to invest in that line of work. And the same thing is true with an academic pursuit, or the same thing is true with a business pursuit. If a small win amps you up to continue to investing more resources into repeating or increasing that win, you're going to do it. And so it's a strength and a weakness. The same thing that steers many people into destructive habits also steers people into extreme success because they're willing to repeat the same mundane actions over and over and over again if the possibility of them getting 1 or 2% better than the last time is on the table.
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of like dogs. Like I let my dogs out, they go pee outside, they get a treat, and sooner or later they're not going to pee in the house because they're not getting a treat. The whole positive reinforcement. I never understood when I used to look at data on parenting, because I was very interested before I became a parent in how the hell to do it, because I have no idea how to parent. I'm just winging it every single day. And one is like reading studies on positive versus negative reinforcement. So if my kid misbehaves and I beat the crap out of that kid, sure, he's going to know that, okay, well, if I do that, I'm going to get this negative reaction. But what actually does better in the studies I've read, and I could be misinterpreting them, is that you're better off rewarding good behaviors. So instead of punishing bad behaviors. So it's fascinating to see that. I've never hit my kids. I've never had to. And they seem to make the right decisions. And I think it doesn't have to be like you buy them a car. It's just say you're proud of them. Kids are very receptive to those things. Like, you listen to some of these people who end up going crazy or end up becoming criminals. They'll always say like, yeah, my father never said he was proud of me, or I didn't know my father, or my mom was very tough on me or strict. And it's really weird as you read that, you navigate through parenting and you're like, okay, what if I was just a nicer person and I'm not my kid's friends, I'm their parent, but then I'm able to, hey, you know what? I'm really proud of you. I don't think enough people say that. What if you even said that to normal people? Like, what if you just told your friend, like, you know what? It's awesome knowing you. Like, you add a lot of benefit to my life. I think a lot of dudes are like, bro, that's weak. That's gay, bro. It's not. It's not. I think it's a great thing. I'll do it all the time. Bro, I appreciate you. Not, hey, I appreciate it. I will tell people I appreciate you. That simple connection, that simple replacement of that word it for you, in my opinion, has a whole different meaning. Like, I appreciate this action, right? No, I appreciate you performing that action and every action you've performed. So simple things like that, I find for people, from a psychological standpoint, just really bodes well with creating those interpersonal connections, the relationships. And again, there's nothing wrong with complimenting people and being a little bit soft once in a while. There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah, I agree with that 99%. I do think I have the suspicion that parenting books and psychology books peaked in the late 80s, and most information coming out of the social psychology field post 1990 is communist bullshit.
I agree.
And so I think that, yes, the your natural inclination to deliver wrath to people is likely substantially excessive. Most people will do better as parents or friends or partners, husbands, wives, if they can skew more positive than they're naturally feeling. However, whatever it is the leading psychologists thought in the 80s is probably closer to the truth than whatever leading psychologists think today.
So there was one book, I heard it on Patrick Bet-David's podcast. It's called The Anxious Generation. So it's about social media and the anxiety. And I'm listening to that. It's actually fascinating. I go on a lot of road trips for wrestling. So, I'll be like, kids, we're learning today. We're putting on an audiobook rather than just countless hours of rappers who go to Diddy parties. Let's just do this for time being. So, I think we'll get into, I'd like to get into one more like fitness question. So if you're looking at, this is where you're the best. Like, I've actually applied a lot of your nutrition knowledge to my daily diet because I'm no longer competing. What is the optimal diet structure for everyday folks? Someone who wants to go to the gym, wants to look good, but isn't going to like alter their life for it. And I know that's a lot of the people and a lot of people you work with. And it's actually beyond the scope of what we cover on this channel a lot, because we're dealing with, how do I gain more muscle? How do I run faster? It's like, let's say you're just a dude who wants to look good at the beach with your family, go to the water parks, look good. What would you say is just some, broad kind of diet advice for those folks?
The easiest suggestions that I've ever shared that work for me, work for almost everybody who I work with, is eat protein dominant real food only when you're hungry and stop eating when you're full. It's basically as simple as that for most people. And so what do I mean by protein dominant real food? Well, most people aren't actually familiar with the macronutrient profiles for most foods, but I will tell you what protein dominant means is meat. Animal products are protein dominant. No other food is protein dominant. And so, if you're thinking about vegetables, fruits, grains, not protein dominant. Steak, protein dominant. Chicken, protein dominant. Fish, protein dominant. Eggs, close enough to protein dominant. And so a majority of whatever it is you eat should, in my view, my non-registered dietitian view, be from an animal, and a minority of your plate should be not from an animal. It doesn't mean you need to be carnivore. It doesn't mean you need to be keto, but it does mean if you just have a 9-inch diameter plate that you're eating for dinner, 60% of the real estate on that plate should come from an animal, ideally a leaner source of protein, but at the very least it should be meat, mostly animal flesh, and then a small amount, only to the extent that you crave them, can be, a carb, whether it's going to be a little bit of pasta, a little bit of rice, a little bit of bread. But the vast majority of the real estate should be protein. And then once you're full, you stop eating, meaning once you're no longer hungry, you stop eating. People ask me, how do I know if I'm hungry? I say, well, how do you know if you need to pee? Like, you know, if you need to pee, you should know if you're hungry. If you don't know that you're hungry, you're not hungry. Just wait longer. And so some people might need to eat 4 meals per day if they're training hard. Some people need to eat 5 meals per day if they're training hard. But the average American who maybe they go to the gym 3 times a week, they do 45 minutes of lifting, 20 minutes of cardio, that person can very likely get by on 2 meals per day if they just go by eat when I'm hungry and don't eat when I'm full. That it might be 3 meals a day. I'm not saying that you can only eat 2 meals a day, but for a lot of people are actually okay eating 1 meal a day because they've been overeating for so many years that they have such significant fat reserves that they can go for like 6 to 12 weeks eating 1 meal a day. And they're literally not hungry doing it. It's like, that's totally sufficient for them. And, they lose like 8 pounds a month for 3 months doing that. So many people don't realize that they have built their lives around eating meals because it's mealtime, not because they're hungry. And so if you realize that, unless you're diabetic or you have like significant metabolic issues, if you structure your training a certain way, you're going to be less hungry. If you eat protein dominant real food, you're going to end up eating less of it. And if you stop eating when you're full, you're not cramming calories down your throat so that your body can't process them. You're actually just eating the amount that your body needs. Bonus points for limiting or eliminating alcohol. Alcohol cannot be properly metabolized. There's no amount of exercise that you can do to undo the damage alcohol does. And limit sugar consumption, because what sugar does is it makes you think you're hungry when you're not. And so if you can basically do protein dominant real food when you're hungry until you're full, limit your sugar consumption, limit your alcohol consumption, the average American would lose 25 pounds doing that.
Easily. I'm at a point now where, I train in the morning, so I'm usually hungrier in the morning. And then as the day goes on, it tapers down and I will adjust my serving sizes there. But I also I churn through stuff so fast that it becomes a blood sugar thing where it's like, all right, I need to eat, but most people aren't at my body fat, nor should they be. For me, again, speaking of genetics, that's a lot of genetics, a lot of just years of doing it. But there are those components. I think that's fantastic and helpful information that basically don't eat if you're not hungry. And when you're satiated while you're eating, stop eating. Like we were raised with that though, right? Like, mom, you better eat all that food on your plate. You better eat all that food on your plate.
Right. And it's like people are raised to contend with the challenges of 2 generations ago. So our grandparents might have gone through a war and, had the risk of famine exceed the risk of type 2 diabetes, but that's not us. It's much more likely that we're going to get type 2 diabetes than we're going to die of a famine, based on how the last 40 years went. So our dietary habits need to be modified to accommodate that. Telling kids to finish all the food on their plate, I'm okay with that for some protein, because they're probably not going to, they're just going to eat a lot of carbs if you let them, and they probably won't eat enough protein. But, telling kids to finish their carbs if they're not hungry for them probably doesn't help. They're going to eat enough carbs. Kids like carbs. So as long as you give them access to carbs, you shouldn't force them to finish their carbs.
Yeah. If we go out to eat and let's say my kid gets a burger, I'm full. I'm like, just finish your meat.
Yeah.
Come on. That was a $14 burger, bro. Like, you're finishing the meat, or I'll eat it myself. I'm like, cool. Sometimes I hope they don't finish, because the calories don't count if it comes from someone else's plate.
Right.
Scientifically validated fact.
I think that's girl math. I don't know if that's boy math, but I think girl math.
Sometimes can I still identify as a woman, or is that over now that Trump won?
No, your window closed January 20th, 2024.
Darn. Well, we'll just take the other dubs.